My husband threw a glass of wine in my face in front of his friends, screaming, "You idiot!" The moment the red wine hit Emma's face, everything changed. The warmth of the liquid soaked into her dress, its sticky sweetness mingling with the scent of ripe berries and alcohol. She felt the sting, not from the wine, but from the humiliation. Around the dinner table, Daniel's friends watched, frozen in shock, their faces a mixture of discomfort and amusement. And then Daniel laughed. It was a cruel, condescending laugh that echoed in her mind, confirming the harsh truth she had been denying for too long. "Why are you always acting like such an idiot?" he sneered, his words cutting through her like shards of glass. This wasn't just a joke, it was a calculated attempt to belittle her, to assert his power in front of his friends. In that moment, Emma realized this wasn't just about the wine. It was about years of emotional abuse, manipulation, and control. Daniel had humiliated her before, but never so publicly. At first it was subtle, belittling her ideas, mocking her dreams of starting a photography business, dismissing her thoughts as silly. Over time, the comments became sharper, crueler, meant to make her feel small. And it worked. She began to doubt herself, to question her worth, to wonder if she was truly the problem, just as Daniel always implied. But this time was different. This public display of cruelty shattered the illusion she had been holding on to, the illusion that things would get better, that Daniel would change, that she just needed to try harder to make him happy. Standing there, humiliated and heartbroken, Emma saw Daniel for who he truly was, a manipulator who thrived on control. But she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. Summoning every ounce of strength, Emma wiped her face with her napkin, stood up with grace, and excused herself. Her voice was steady, her expression unreadable, giving away nothing of the turmoil inside. She walked out of the restaurant alone, leaving Daniel behind, still laughing, still playing the charming host. He didn't follow her. He never did. His reputation mattered more than his marriage, more than her dignity. Emma drove home in silence, her hands trembling, her heart racing. But underneath the shock and pain was something new: clarity. As she sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, Emma asked herself the question she had avoided for years. Was it really that bad? The answer came swiftly and painfully. Yes, it was. She realized she had been making excuses for Daniel's behavior, convincing herself that he didn't mean it, that he was just stressed, that she was overreacting. But tonight shattered that illusion. She wasn't overreacting. She was being emotionally abused, publicly humiliated, and manipulated by a man who was supposed to love her. And she was done pretending otherwise. For the first time, Emma didn't feel anger. She felt clarity. She saw the truth clearly, without the haze of denial or the hope that things would change. Daniel wasn't going to change, but she could. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing, a list of everything Daniel had ever done to hurt her. Every insult, every lie, every public humiliation. She was done being his victim. She was ready to take control. And for the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost: hope. Emma sat in the dimly lit kitchen, her mind replaying the evening's events in vivid detail. The warm, sticky feeling of red wine on her face, the cold laughter that followed, and the smug look on Daniel's face as he ridiculed her in front of his friends. It wasn't just the humiliation that hurt, it was the realization that he enjoyed it. He had done it deliberately, calculated to break her spirit, to assert his dominance. Yet, what shook her even more was the moment of silence that followed. The uncomfortable glances, the half-hearted chuckles from his friends, unsure whether to join in or look away. Not one of them stood up for her. Not one of them said a word. They just watched as Daniel reduced her to nothing more than a joke. In that moment, Emma felt completely alone. But amidst the pain, she also felt something she hadn't expected: clarity. For years, Emma had justified Daniel's behavior. She told herself that he was just joking, that he was stressed from work, that she was too sensitive. She convinced herself that she was the problem, that if she were just a better wife, he wouldn't treat her this way. But tonight shattered those illusions. Daniel's words weren't jokes, they were weapons. He used them to control her, to keep her self-esteem low, to make sure she never felt good enough to leave him. And the worst part was, she had let him. She had believed every lie, every insult, every excuse. But tonight she saw the truth with painful clarity. Daniel wasn't joking, he was cruel, and she was done being his victim. As she sat there alone in the kitchen, Emma made a decision. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg him to apologize, to promise he would never do it again. She had heard those empty promises before. This time, she was going to take control. Her hands trembled as she opened her laptop and began to type. She made a list. Every insult, every public humiliation, every time Daniel had made her feel small. She wrote down the lies he told, the manipulation he used, the way he twisted every argument to make her feel like she was overreacting. She wrote until her fingers ached, until the weight of his words lifted from her shoulders and settled onto the pages in front of her. For the first time, she felt like she could breathe. But she wasn't done. She remembered the laughter, the way Daniel's friends had watched her humiliation without saying a word. They had been complicit, enabling his abuse by pretending it was just a joke, but one of them had recorded it, and now she had the video. Proof of Daniel's cruelty, his complete disregard for her dignity. She could use it, not out of spite, but to show him that his actions had consequences. To take back the power he had stolen from her. She knew Daniel's greatest weakness, his reputation. He thrived on being liked, on being admired. He wasn't the smartest or the most hardworking, but he knew how to charm people, how to make them laugh, how to be the life of the party. That was his power. And Emma was about to take it away. When Daniel finally came home, hours later, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, calm and composed. He expected her to be crying, to beg for an apology, to let him charm his way back into her good graces. But she didn't give him that satisfaction. Instead, she showed him the video. She watched as his face turned pale, his confidence crumbling as he realized he wasn't in control anymore. "Delete it," he demanded, his voice sharp with fear. But Emma just smiled. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady. "It was just a joke, wasn't it?" She saw the panic in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he realized that his charm wouldn't save him this time. Emma wasn't the powerless wife he had manipulated for years. She was in control now, and she wasn't going to let him walk away without facing the consequences of his actions. She stood up, closing her laptop and walking past him without another word. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't worried about his anger or his charm. She saw him for what he truly was, a coward who needed to hurt others to feel powerful. And she was done being his victim. As she walked away, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: freedom. She was no longer trapped in his web of lies and manipulation. She was free to be herself, to reclaim her dignity, to live her life on her own terms. And she was just getting started. Emma sat alone in the dimly lit kitchen, the scent of red wine still lingering in her memory. The evening played back in her mind like a cruel movie reel, the warm, sticky sensation of wine dripping down her face, the stunned silence of Daniel's friends, and his laughter ringing out, cold and callous. "Why are you always acting like such an idiot?" His words were calculated, designed to humiliate her, to make her feel small. It wasn't the first time, but tonight was different. This was a public spectacle, a deliberate act of emotional violence meant to strip away her dignity. And the worst part? Not one person stood up for her. Not one of his so-called friends said a word. They just watched, some nervously chuckling, others avoiding eye contact. They were witnesses to her humiliation, and their silence cut as deeply as Daniel's words. But amidst the pain, Emma felt something she hadn't expected: clarity. For years, she had justified Daniel's behavior. She convinced herself that he didn't mean it, that he was stressed, that she was overreacting. She told herself that she was too sensitive, that she needed to toughen up. Daniel was charming after all. He was the life of the party, the man everyone admired. He could make people laugh with ease, charm his way out of any situation, and always seemed to know exactly what to say. But behind closed doors, his charm turned to cruelty. He belittled her dreams, dismissed her accomplishments, and made her feel like she was nothing without him. He isolated her, convincing her that no one else would ever love her, that she was lucky to have him. And she believed him. She believed every word, every lie, every manipulation. But not anymore. Tonight, the illusion shattered. As she sat alone, the weight of realization settled over her. This wasn't love. This was control. Daniel didn't love her. He loved controlling her. making her feel small so he could feel powerful. He thrived on her pain, her insecurity, her doubt. But tonight, she wasn't crying. She wasn't begging for an apology he didn't mean. Instead, she felt a calmness wash over her, a cold, steely resolve. She was done. Done being his victim. Done letting him control her life. Done pretending that everything was okay. Emma knew Daniel would come home expecting to find her broken, sulking, maybe even apologizing for embarrassing him. That was his game, twisting every situation to make her the villain, to make her feel guilty for his cruelty. But tonight, she wouldn't play his game. When he walked through the door, his expression smug and self-satisfied, she was ready. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice casual, arrogant. He was still basking in his victory, still convinced that he was in control, but Emma didn't answer. She simply turned her laptop around, showing him the video, the one someone had recorded at the dinner party. The video that captured everything, his words, his laughter, her humiliation. His face went pale, his confidence crumbling as he watched himself on the screen, watched his cruelty play out for all to see. "Delete it," he demanded, his voice sharp with panic. "Right now." But Emma just stared at him, her expression cold and unyielding. "Why?" she asked, her voice calm. "It was just a joke, wasn't it?" She saw the fear flash in his eyes, saw his hands tremble as he realized he wasn't in control anymore. Daniel's charm was his power. He had built his career on being the likable guy, the man everyone wanted to be around. But that video shattered his image, revealing him for who he truly was. A bully, a coward who thrived on hurting others. Daniel's panic turned to anger. "You're overreacting, Emma. Nobody cares about stupid things like this. It was just a joke." But his voice wavered, his bravado slipping as he realized she wasn't backing down. "If it's just a joke," she said, her voice icy, "why are you so scared?" She watched him falter, watched him struggle to maintain his composure. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. For the first time, she saw him for what he truly was, a man who needed to tear her down to feel powerful. And she was done giving him that power. Emma stood up, closing her laptop and picking up her notebook. She watched Daniel's eyes flicker to the worn pages, his brow furrowing. "What's that?" he asked, suspicion coloring his voice. "A record," she replied, her voice steady, "of every lie, every insult, every time he tried to make me feel small." She saw him pale, saw the panic return. "You're crazy," he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" she asked, her gaze unwavering. "Or are you just realizing that you can't control me anymore?" She watched him open his mouth, then close it, at a loss for words. He was losing. And for the first time, Emma didn't feel fear. She felt power. She walked past him without another word, her shoulders squared, her head held high. She was done being his victim. She was done letting him control the narrative. She was done playing his game. As she reached the door, she paused, glancing back over her shoulder. "By the way," she said, her voice cold and detached, "you might want to check your bank account." She saw his eyes widen, saw the panic take hold as he realized just how thoroughly she had planned her escape. And then she walked out, leaving him standing there, his empire of lies crumbling around him. For the first time in years, Emma felt free. She had taken back her power, her dignity, her life, and she was never looking back. Emma sat in the quiet darkness of her kitchen, the echoes of Daniel's laughter still ringing in her ears. The sting of red wine on her face had faded, but the humiliation lingered, sharp and unforgiving. She had felt every pair of eyes on her at that dinner table, watching her as Daniel mocked her, waiting to see how she would react. But she hadn't given him the satisfaction of breaking down. Instead, she had wiped her face with calculated grace, stood up with her dignity intact, and walked out of the restaurant without a word. It wasn't until she reached the silence of her own kitchen that the reality hit her. Daniel enjoyed humiliating her. He had thrown wine in her face, not out of anger, but out of pure, unfiltered cruelty. And his friends had laughed, not out of humor, but out of discomfort, choosing to enable his abuse rather than confront his behavior. This wasn't the first time Daniel had hurt her, but it was the first time she saw him clearly. He wasn't just cruel. He was calculated. He had chosen that moment, in front of his friends, to break her spirit, to make her feel insignificant and powerless. And she realized with painful clarity that he had been doing this for years, chipping away at her confidence, her dreams, her very identity. Daniel had belittled her ambitions, mocked her ideas, and dismissed her emotions as irrational. He made her feel small so he could feel powerful. He convinced her that she was lucky to have him, that no one else would ever love her, that she was nothing without him. But tonight, Emma saw the truth. She wasn't lucky to have him. She was trapped, and she was done being his prisoner. For years, Emma had played her role perfectly. She was the supportive wife, the one who smiled at the right moments, laughed at the right jokes, and stood quietly by Daniel's side as he charmed his way through life. He was the man everyone admired, witty, charismatic, always the life of the party. But no one saw what happened behind closed doors. No one saw the way he twisted her words, manipulated her emotions, and gaslighted her into believing she was the problem. He made her doubt herself, question her worth, and feel grateful for his patience when he put up with her sensitivity. Emma realized she had been living in a web of his lies, a world he controlled with charm and cruelty. But tonight, she was breaking free. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to scream. She wasn't going to give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. Instead, she opened her laptop and began typing. She documented everything, every insult, every lie, every time he made her feel small. She wrote down his words, his tone, his expressions, capturing every detail with cold precision. It wasn't just about remembering. It was about taking back control. For too long, Daniel had controlled the narrative, convincing her that she was overreacting, that she was imagining things. But this time, she was writing her own story. Emma wasn't just preparing to leave. She was preparing to win. She knew Daniel would fight her, not because he loved her, but because he hated losing. His reputation was everything to him. He had built his career on being the charming, likable guy, the man everyone wanted to be around. But Emma knew his secret. His charm was just a mask, hiding the cruelty underneath, and she was going to rip that mask off, piece by piece. The first step was the video. One of his friends had recorded the dinner party, capturing the exact moment Daniel threw wine in her face, his cruel laughter echoing through the room. It was perfect, undeniable proof of his public humiliation. Daniel thrived on his reputation, on being admired and respected. But that video would shatter his image, revealing him for who he truly was, a bully who thrived on belittling others. And Emma knew exactly how to use it. When Daniel finally came home, hours later, his confidence was palpable. He walked into the kitchen with a smug grin, expecting to find her crying, ready to apologize for embarrassing him. But instead, he found her calm, composed, and waiting. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Emma didn't answer. She simply turned her laptop around, showing him the video. She watched his face go pale as he realized the severity of his actions, the way his friends looked uncomfortable, the way he laughed as she stood there, humiliated and silent. "Delete it," he snapped, his voice sharp with panic. But Emma just looked at him, her expression cold and unyielding. "Why?" she asked, her voice steady. "It was just a joke, wasn't it?" She saw the flicker of fear in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened as he realized he was losing control. "Emma, don't be dramatic. Nobody cares about stupid things like this," he argued, his voice wavering. But she could see the cracks forming, his confidence crumbling as he faced the truth. "If nobody cares," she said, leaning back in her chair, "then why are you so scared?" Daniel's bravado shattered. He tried to charm his way out, to gaslight her into believing she was overreacting, to manipulate her with guilt. But Emma wasn't falling for it. She was done being his victim. "I called a lawyer today," she said, her voice calm and unwavering. "I'm leaving you." She watched the panic set in, watched him realize that his charm wouldn't save him this time. "You're not serious," he stammered, his voice cracking. But she was. She was more serious than she had ever been in her life. Emma walked past him, her shoulders squared, her head held high. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Daniel's empire of lies was crumbling, and she wasn't going to be there to pick up the pieces. As she walked out the door, she felt the weight of his manipulation lift from her shoulders. She was free. Free from his lies, his control, his cruelty. She was finally free to live her life on her own terms. And she was never going back. Emma stood at the edge of her past, ready to break free from the prison of manipulation Daniel had built around her. The humiliation of the dinner party still echoed in her mind. the warmth of red wine dripping down her face, Daniel's cruel laughter ringing out as his friends sat silent, complicit in her public shaming. But tonight had been different. Instead of crumbling under his cruelty, Emma had felt a powerful clarity.